Good evening and welcome to this special Q&A. I'm Tony Jones and here to answer your questions tonight, the architect of the federal budget, Treasurer Joe Hockey. Please welcome our guest. Now, last year on Q&A, about this time, Joe Hockey was defending a controversial budget, but given credit for facing his critics. The latest Hockey budget is less contentious, but there are still plenty of challenging questions. Let's go straight to our first one. It's from David Trudgett.
Joe, you claimed we had a budget emergency to rival Greece to convince the public to support your first budget. Then you backflipped on the rhetoric with your second budget that you called fairer, but it still attacks the most vulnerable, Medicare and education. Why, with an election looming or coming up, should we, the voters, trust you and Team Abbott?
Well, David, last year we started with a budget that was hemorrhaging at about $133 million a day. We've got it down to $96 million a day. It's not enough. We've still got a way to go. In relation to health and education, we're increasing it by about 6% in real terms over the next 4 years, so it keeps increasing. But we've still got a lot of work to do to repair the budget. We're still borrowing that $96 million every day just to pay the bills, and clearly that's not sustainable for any government, whether it's Liberal or Labor, any government. It's unsustainable to keep borrowing that much money every day just to pay the bills.
You don't deny the complete change of emphasis, though, and the end of the idea that we're in a budget emergency?
Well, when we used that term, it was before we were elected, because the spending growth that we were inheriting was far greater than even we anticipated. But we've made a number of very difficult decisions. And because we've been able to implement those decisions, such as cutting foreign aid, such as not being able to pay bonus payments on hospitals or schools, because we've made those decisions, we've addressed part of the problem, but we've still got a long way to go.
Now, I'll just go back to our questioner. You've heard the answer. Do you accept it?
I've got some other questions.
No, we don't. You can make a comment if you like.
You know, why then are we subsidising or spending money, you know, within the mining sectors? You know, there's millions of dollars from the government pouring into those sectors, but they're, you know, you're taking the money out of Medicare, the vulnerable, you know, people that are losing their jobs, so on and so forth.
OK, well, we'll take that as a comment. We'll move to our next question. It's from Gay Vale.
Good evening, Mr Hockey. You've asked Australians to debt up and spend, given the current low interest rates. I was just wondering, can you explain why debt then is good for households but not for the nation?
Well, debt's only good if you can repay it. And for a household or a business, if it helps to grow your business or improve your wealth and helps you to access a home that you might not be able to access if you didn't borrow money from a mortgage, then, you know, the challenge is, how do you repay the money? In the case of Australia, we've got a large continent with a small population, and we've always borrowed from the rest of the world to fund our growth. The private sector does a lot of that. So, on average, when you and I borrow money from the bank, about 1/3 of the dollars actually come from people living overseas who lend to the banks, and then the banks lend it to us. So we're a net borrower of money as a nation. When the government's borrowing in competition with the private sector, it ultimately causes interest rates to rise for everyday Australians through their credit cards or through their home loans. So what we've said is, the sooner the government gets back to living within its means, not having to borrow money every day, $96 million a day, as soon as we can get back to living within our means, it takes pressure off everyday Australians with their own interest rates.
Now, you mentioned banks there, and the recent Barclays Bank survey says that Australia's households are the most indebted in the world and warns that we'd be vulnerable if there was another financial shock, another GFC. I mean, do you take those warnings seriously when you're telling people to go out and borrow more?
Well, you always take warnings seriously. One of the reasons why Australians have very large debt is we've got very high house prices. And so mortgages are very substantial. We've got amongst the highest house prices in the world. Now,
does that make people vulnerable? Because that's the point that Barclays was making.
You're only vulnerable if you can't afford to repay the debt. That's the fundamental point. So you look at Greece at the moment, it's not so much how much debt they have, it's the fact that they can't repay the debt. Whereas other countries like Japan have a massive amount of debt, but they've got the capacity to repay. Now, Australia does have the capacity to repay, but we don't want to expose ourselves to the volatility that we've seen around the rest of the world.
Let's go back to Gai. Are you comfortable with the kind of mixed message that you're hearing?
It's not a mixed message. It's not
It
a
is a
mixed
mixed message, sorry, Mr Hockey. No, I'm not at all comfortable with it, particularly given that we're encouraging people when it is very low interest rates and there's no guarantee that those low interest rates will be maintained, that we're encouraging them to go out and fund, yes, potentially growth things, but if the interest rates rise, they're gone.
You're absolutely right. I think that's a very important point. You should only ever borrow what you can afford to repay, and you should always build in a potential increase in interest rates into your repayment schedule. I don't dispute that at all. But if you can borrow as an individual to invest in things that are going to grow your prosperity or create more jobs, then that's not a bad thing. But you've got to be always measured in the amount of debt you have. And Australia, as a nation, has a government that is still borrowing too much money.
Our next question is from Tristan Grant.
Yeah, just following on from the same question, Mr Hockey. Your budget encourages spending, especially that of small businesses, to stimulate economic growth. However, an elementary study of economics shows savings and prudent investment are the bedrock of a strong and prosperous economy, not frivolous spending. How would these incentives to spend rather than save prepare the Australian economy in the event of another GFC?
Well, we're not encouraging people to be frivolous. And one of the reasons why we didn't go down the path of writing out a $900 cheque is because the suggestion is, well, here's money, go and spend it as you wish. In the case of small business, we're giving them back the money that they actually pay in tax. In the $20,000 accelerated depreciation initiative, they would depreciate it over 4 years. So they get their money back over 4 years. What we've said is in order to improve your cash flow, you can get it back in your first tax return. So if small business goes out now, and if it's a coffee shop, buys a new coffee machine that can increase the profitability of their business, they can write off the cost of that machine against their tax on the 1st of July. But of course, they don't get 100% back, it's against their tax, so it reduces their tax liability. So it's still their money, and they're still getting back their money, but they're investing in the things that will create jobs. And that's what we're trying to do, create more jobs.
Let's just go through that very briefly. If you spend under $20,000 or close to $20,000, you would stand to get on an individual item about $5,000 back on your tax.
It depends on your tax, yeah.
But that's the modelling that you put out suggested that's roughly the figure.
And it may well be that. It depends on your tax liability, whether you're a sole trader or a company. But yes, it gives you back that money. So you're still making a contribution. But I mean, But
it's unlimited, isn't it? You can spend as many $20,000 as you like.
Well, you can now, right? It's just that you depreciate it over 4 years.
Yeah.
Now, what we've said to small business is in order to improve your cash flow, which is a big driver of activity in small business, you can do it immediately. And look, small business is going to be the big job generator of Australia into the future. I mean, it's really exciting for Australia, really exciting to have so many innovators in small business, to have the creativity and job creation in small business. And the new world is going to be all about small business.
It's quite untypical, though, isn't it, to have a measure, a tax, and we'll come back to our questioner because he's got his hand up in a second, but to have a tax measure that you don't actually know what it's going to cost the budget.
Oh, sure we do. It's $1.75 billion over the next 4 years.
It's theoretically, so you're going to cap it at that, are you? Because it's theoretically unlimited from what we understood.
No. But it is their own money going back to them.
Sure.
That's the point. But
it's uncapped,
they've got to
isn't it?
spend it. Yeah,
is it capped or uncapped?
It's uncapped. But it's like anything. If they spend the money, they get it back over.
I understand what you're saying, but if it's uncapped, you don't know how many people are going to take it up.
The more
There's
they
2
do,
million,
the better.
Yeah,
if they go out and spend on their businesses, I know this is difficult to understand, Tony, but if they go out and spend on their businesses and employ more people and innovate That is fantastic. We want small businesses
Okay, well,
to do
let's
that.
hear back from the question who asked that in the first place.
Well, rather than funneling the money through the government, so to speak, and you guys choosing what is appropriate and what's not, why not reduce tax rates overall to allow that money to stay with small businesses, ultimately individuals, for them to be able to choose what's appropriate with that money and what's not?
That's a great question, because we're also giving them a tax cut. You're absolutely right. We're reducing. So in Australia, there's over 2 million small businesses with a turnover of less than $2 million a year. 96% of Australian businesses are small businesses. So what we've said is, if you're incorporated, if you're a company, which is only 1/3 of small businesses, you get a 1.5% tax cut. If you're unincorporated, like a sole trader or in a partnership, we'll give you up to $1,000 and a 5% tax rebate. We're trying to get the cash flow up of small business. And if you get their cash flow up, they can invest in plant and equipment that helps to grow their business. Oh, can I give you an example?
Well, actually, just hold on, because we've got a few other questions on this. Let's
Okay.
go, first of all, to Jade Crystal Wright. Go ahead.
Following on with what you were saying, is it true, Mr. Hockey, that the Bonanza Accelerated Tax Deduction Scheme could turn into another small open business tax rot?
No.
So, for example, if there was a small business and they tried to deduct one of for the tax, like a picture or something like that, wouldn't it be better to put the money towards something better like the university fees?
Well, we've already got strict laws in relation to depreciation. And there's a huge schedule, way too large in fact, in the tax papers, in the Tax Act, that governs the way that you write off different things over a period of time. But please understand, when small business spends money on plant and equipment, they don't get 100% of the money they spend back. It reduces their tax liability. And the important point is they have to spend it in order to grow their business. So in Adelaide Central Markets the other day, I met a man came up to me, he's got a tea business and he's expanding his tea business. He said, because of this initiative, because it'll help his cash flow, he's going out and buying a forklift, one of the ones that usually with a hand, I've got to be careful, but they use a hand, and the hand forklift, which is $15,000. Previously, he could only depreciate it over 4 years, he can do it over 1 year. He thinks he's going to improve his productivity. And he might even employ someone new next year. How good is that? How good is that?
Do you have any idea in the following tax year how much it's going to cost at all?
Well, as I said, the total amount of money is about $1.75 billion over the next 4
No, but
years.
it's uncapped, so you don't really know the answer to that.
Oh, Tony, I mean, if you know, there's a lot of things that are uncapped in the government
So,
budget.
I guess what you're saying is, I didn't
don't
quite-
think everyone in small business is evil, because they're not.
No.
They're actually damn good people working damn hard to earn a living. And if they're going to spend money growing their business, I say that's fantastic.
All right, let's go to our next question, which is also on small business, from Brett Lamond.
Mr. Hockey, following on the $20,000 deduction, the accelerated deduction, currently you've set it up so that it's $20,000 or less, but if you spend $20,001, you don't get that immediate deduction. Wouldn't it be better, in terms of what we've been talking about, some of these investments people make of $15,000, many small businesses will spend a lot more than $20,000. So wouldn't it be better to allow the first $20,000 to be immediately deducted and then depreciated or put in a pool?
Well, we had to draw a line somewhere. We had to draw a line somewhere.
But the line is $20,000.
It's $20,000 per item.
But that wouldn't change, would it? If he had an item that was worth $40,000 but only deducted $20,000,
Well,
that's the point that
he'd
he's
do it
making.
$40,000. He'd do it over the 4 years.
Yeah, so-
if he's under $2 million, yeah.
But why couldn't he just deduct the $20,000 worth of that over in the
Well,
first year?
we took it as
Is it too complicated?
Yeah, I mean, it starts. Inevitably, yes. Inevitably, yes. But look, I mean, $20,000 means you can get a small car, you can get second-hand goods, and if you've got a pool already that's less than $20,000, you can write off that pool immediately.
Let's go back to our questioner. I think he's got his hand up.
Yeah,
Is there something you would actually want to buy, some plant that would cost more than that?
I have many small clients, small business clients, and I'm getting this question all the time. They have investments they want to make which are going to be more than $20,000. And I've got to say to them, under the current announcement, it's up to 20 and that's it.
Well,
So
the good news for your clients is it used to be 1,000. So
Yeah, I know.
therefore, please, there's good news here. There's good news here in that it used to be $1,000. It's now $20,000. Go out and have a go. Go out and buy that equipment, invest.
So, but no
prudent
chance of any flexibility
No.
using the $20,000 figure as a core? No chance of any flexibility? Okay. All right, we've got Ray Favetti is also a small business person. Where's Ray?
Treasurer. My question is why was the budget focused on companies with turnover of less than 2 million when there are companies with turnover greater than 2 million and say under 10 million who are also struggling financially? They can't employ new employees, they can't finance plant and equipment, and then they're stacked with the statutory payments such as payroll tax and increasing workers' compensation premiums. They're basically been forgotten in this budget.
Well, Ray, you'd always like to do more. We didn't have the money to do more, and if you were to increase it to, say, turnover of 5 million or 10 million or whatever the case was, it'd cost the budget more money, and we haven't got that capacity at the moment. The second thing is, if we lift small business, I'm absolutely confident that all boats will rise. Medium-sized businesses, large businesses, family businesses of all sorts, because ultimately if you've got the big driver coming from those 2 million small businesses and they go out and buy a bit of plant or equipment, computers, whatever the case is, if tradies go out and buy new tools, they might buy them from medium-sized businesses and larger businesses as well. So it starts to flow through the economy. And the reason why, can I explain why we're doing this, Tony? We are doing it because...
Stimulate the economy.
No, we are doing it because we are focused on the opportunities that Australia has into the future. I mean, the big disruptors in the world at the moment are small businesses that have become very large businesses very quickly. Whether it be a Facebook or an Alibaba or an Airbnb, these are small businesses that quickly became large businesses because of innovation, because of technology. Australia has that innovation capacity, but we've held them back. And now we're asking people to have a go, to invest in that innovation. Plus, we've got new initiatives on employee share schemes, on crowdfunding and a range of other things that help those small businesses to get out there and innovate.
Are you, I suppose I'm asking this on your behalf, are you looking down the track to cut tax to larger businesses and to make incentives like this for larger businesses? Or is this a one-off stimulus measure that lasts a couple of years to the end of this budget?
No. Our tax cuts for small business are real and permanent. We've said in relation to the accelerated depreciation up to $20,000 that it applies for 2 and a bit years, covering this financial year and the next 2 financial years. We'll see how it goes. And the next logical step would be to lift everyone else, to have a collective lift. But we're facing a lot of offshore competition. Company tax rate in the United Kingdom is now 20%. And in a number of other...
Is that your aim, 20% for company tax in Australia?
There are different... I'd love to do that, but we've got other priorities at the moment. We haven't got that capacity.
All right, let's change subjects. We'll come back to these kind of issues shortly, but over the past few days, questions about equity and fairness in the budget have re-emerged. We've got a question on that from Cora Moore.
Mr. Hockey, analysis from the National Centre for Social and Economic Modelling identifies how heavily the burden of budget consolidation falls on those less well off, highlighting the huge inequity in your government's 4-year blueprint for fiscal repair. How does this independent analysis fit with the budget which you described as responsible, measured and fair?
Cora, I haven't seen that research, that modelling, and no one else has.
No, well, I'll tell you one figure, please, Mr. Hockey.
Sorry?
I'll tell you one figure from it. It says that some families will lose $21,000 over 4 years.
Yeah. Well, that was commissioned by the Labor Party, as you know, that research, and it was only 2 pages were released in a press release by the Labor Party. I'm not wrong, am I? Today they refused to release that research, ma'am.
No, they are releasing it now, and we've got access to the modelling that's been released, and this is what they basically say.
Hang on, I haven't seen this modelling.
What would you like to hear about it?
Well, no, please tell me.
Okay, so the modelling is being released. I believe it's going online first thing tomorrow morning.
Oh, well, great. Then.
So evidently,
how do you know?
Evidently, because it's sent to us. Evidently, NatSem has taken 25 specific measures from the government and analysed from the budget, I should say, and analysed their impact using the StinMod model of Australian tax and benefit systems. Are you aware of the model, first of all?
I'm familiar with StinMod, but I don't know what the assumptions were in the modelling. Look, let's deal with the facts, right? What we've had to do in order to address the challenge that we inherited is to start reducing government expenditure, and that's applied in a range of different areas. In this budget, we actually.
Anyone who's calling out, we're only hearing a faint blur, so please wait. We might come to you, but anyone who calls out, the microphone won't be over your head. We're going to the questioners who've been speaking at the moment. So let the Treasurer speak. Thank you.
In this budget, for example, we've made proposed changes to the pension system so that the lowest income pensioners get more of the pension, and people with a home and liquid assets of up to $1.15 million do not any longer collect the pension but still get the healthcare card. Now, in order to reduce the top end benefits and provide benefits to lower income Australians, we've had to take that measure in this budget. The same with childcare. Average families, everyday families, get an extra $1,500 a year. People at the higher end get less. Now,
so can I just say, you know what the NatSem modelling said today.
No.
Whether you deny the modelling, that's fair enough, but it actually claimed that a single income family on $65,000 a year with 2 children would lose nearly $21,000 over 4 years.
Well, I'll tell you where the modelling is flawed. Firstly, it hasn't been publicly released, right? So we haven't seen it. You're asking me about something I haven't seen, the government hasn't seen, and most of the media haven't seen. So you've obviously got an exclusive in getting this information.
Well, I can tell you...
You're asking me about something I haven't seen. But OK, let's assume...
But we are having a discussion here.
Let's assume...
I can tell you one other thing about the modelling, which is it's based on detailed information from a sample of 44,450 families in the 2 latest ABS surveys in the 2006 census. And I think it's fair to say that modelling has been used by the Treasury and Social Services and Employment Departments.
But it comes down to the assumptions, Tony. I mean, it's like a sausage machine, right? I've seen lots of economic modelling. What you put in and what comes out, you don't want to see sometimes. I want to see what's going into this sausage machine, right?
Yeah.
I know that's a fearful thought for many, but when you talk about economic modelling, we can spend the whole program talking about something I haven't seen, the government hasn't seen, and quite frankly, we don't know what they put into it because it was commissioned by the Labor Party, paid for by the Labor Party, and the press release was written by Bill Shorten's office.
I'm going to quickly go. That gentleman had his hand up there. We'll quickly go to you.
So you talk about modelling and government expenditure. Over the last 3 years, your government has increased the deficit by $24.585 billion. You're talking about government expenditure. How can your government spend money you don't have and increase the deficit?
Well, it's a good question, but we haven't been in government for 3 years. We've only been in for about 18 months.
But you're still borrowing money you haven't got. You're still spending money you haven't got.
OK, all right.
You're absolutely right, sir.
We've heard your question.
The challenge is we inherited a budget that was hemorrhaging $133 million a day. We've reduced it to 96. It's still too high. Can I tell you? It is still too high. You're absolutely right. And we've still got a lot of work to do. But the only way we can reduce that is to reduce government expenditure. Now, over the next 4 years...
OK.
Over the next 4 years...
There's no point arguing the toss here. Look, we're going to go to some other questions from the floor. We've got quite a few on the specifics of the budget. We've got one from Linda Baldwin.
At the risk of sounding aggressive...
There's no risk in this audience.
I am a woman, though. The cut to family tax benefit Part B could impact as much as a loss of $49 a week to the single parents of our country. They need that money to live now, Mr Hockey. How can this be fair and equitable whilst our society's gap between the rich and poor is ever widening?
Well, a lot of people that receive Family Tax Benefit Part B also receive Family Tax Benefit Part A. So they're still getting significant payments from the government, even when their youngest child turns 6. So under the proposal, what we've said is when the youngest child is now going to school, people will not be eligible for continued Family Tax Benefit Part B because we can't pay parents to stay at home. We haven't got that financial capacity. We want to encourage workforce participation. We want to give people a choice, parents a choice. A lot of those parents will still be receiving another family tax benefit, FTB Part A. But we can't pay people not to work. We want to encourage them to work. And that's one of the reasons why we've already put in an extra $5.9 billion into childcare, but family tax benefit is still nearly 3 times the size of childcare in total
Let's spell this out,
government
because this particular measure, this legislation, still held up in the Senate. And so I suppose you really are hoping that the crossbenchers listen to your argument and not that argument.
Well, the issue is, if you want to have more money spent on childcare, you have to pay for it somehow. I mean, there's no magic pudding anymore. So if you're going to give...
But are you holding the childcare measures to ransom so that the crossbenchers have to consider passing this legislation they didn't want to?
I haven't met well, I'm being a bit rough on the crossbenchers. Most of the people in the Senate want all the spending but none of the savings. That's unsustainable. I mean, if you can't keep paying for things on the credit card. So what we've said is, if you want to have more money spent on childcare, you have to make some savings in other areas. It still means you're going to spend around 3 times the amount on family tax benefits that you spend on childcare. But one of the reasons we're doing it is if we can lift the level of female workforce participation, giving mums a choice to go back to work, if we can lift it to the same level as Canada, then we will increase the size of the Australian economy by the equivalent of a city in Newcastle every year. So we're increasing the size of the economy because more people are participating in work.
So
we're trying to give parents
is the
a choice.
equation this, that a sole parent on $55,000 effectively going to lose $6,000 a year, according to the NatSem figures? So are you basically saying to them, if you go to work, you can make that money back?
Oh, well, effectively you can, depending on how old the children are.
Is that the logic of what you're saying?
Because we want...
You lose $6,000, but you go to work and you should get it back.
Because the best form of assistance to families, if there is a choice, and I want to emphasise the choice for parents. Having said that, there are a lot of people in capital cities that don't have a choice about work because of the size of their mortgages. So a lot of people don't have choice, but we want to give parents a choice. If you want to have that choice, you will always financially be better off over the long term having a job.
Okay, we're going to go to another question that's related to this, because another one of the measures that's come up related to savings. It's Siobhan Moore.
The government has recently maligned the practice of claiming both government-funded and employer-funded paid parental leave as double-dipping, a rort, and basically fraud. But that practice was the intention of the original paid parental leave scheme, and indeed the explanatory memorandum to the paid parental leave bill expressly stated that parents could receive government paid leave before, after or at the same time as employer-provided paid leave. Can you understand why women such as myself, who have lawfully claimed both types of payment, might feel disparaged by the government's dialogue on this issue?
Well, Siobhan, I'm sorry if that's the way you feel, and it certainly was never intended. The fact is, the government pays $11,500 in paid parental leave. When we came to government, we actually wanted to implement a wage replacement paid parental leave scheme for women, including superannuation, so a full scheme that was funded by a levy on business. And that would have replaced all these schemes, including the private sector schemes. Now, the Australian people said, no, we don't want that. So we looked at the paid parental leave scheme that's in place now, and it was patently obvious that in, for example, the case of the government, we were paying a full wage replacement paid parental leave scheme to government employees, and then they were also claiming $11,500 from the government's scheme, paid parental leave scheme, which is separately delivered by Centrelink. From our perspective, you couldn't do both and still put more money into childcare. And a lot of parents said to us, they want us not to focus on the first 6 months, they want us to focus on the first 6 years of a child's development. So one of the things we had to do, and which I'm proud that we did, we've actually put nearly $1 billion extra into preschools because the money ran out.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Siobhan, our question, because I'm not sure that you've entirely answered the question that she just asked. Go ahead.
My question was, why did the government choose to use language like rort and double dip for a practice referring to the old scheme? I don't understand how that was necessary and related to the changes that have been announced in this budget.
As I said, I understand your concern about the words, and I'm sorry if you've taken offence. But we can't afford...
Was the use of the words...
Well, let me finish.
No, hang on. Was the use of the words wrong? It's a really simple question.
Well, we shouldn't... Yes, I accept that. I totally accept that. No problems, right? I accept that. Right. But having...
Did you imagine, when those words were said, did you imagine, for example, that some of your own colleagues in the ministry and the cabinet were in fact rorting the system? Well, no. To use your own expression.
No. But having said that...
Perhaps you should have asked.
Well, maybe I should have. But the thing is, we can't afford to pay two schemes because, of course, for an employer, wages are a deduction, right? So effectively, the taxpayer ends up paying for two schemes, and we just can't do that. We can't afford to do that, particularly given that we've just put an extra $5.5 billion into childcare, and we need to put an extra $3.5 billion in as well.
Okay, a previous questioner has her hand up. We'll just quickly go back to you, Clover.
In 2010, Mr. Hockey, when you helped the Labor government to pass the present paid parental leave scheme into law, surely you must have been fully aware of how it was framed. And at the same time as passing it, you actually said it was inadequate. Now, the new policy that you're proposing, you are expecting us to accept that that is now adequate. Shouldn't you now think about taking this new policy to the people at the next election?
Well, my response is, how do we pay for the extra childcare? Which 165,000 parents have said they want more accessible, more affordable childcare. And as part of our overall childcare package, we're actually targeting, in particular, those most in need and most vulnerable in the community with a specific payment. So if we're doing all of that, we can't at the same time continue to pay paid parental leave to people that are already receiving it in full from their employers.
All right, we've got another question from Mark Travers.
There's been a lot of talk recently about double dipping. As Treasurer, do you believe that politicians receiving an away-from-home allowance of $270 per night to stay in a house owned by their spouse is double dipping?
Well, no, because ultimately you have to pay for the rent or you have to pay for the hotel accommodation, whatever the case is. You're living away from home and then the employers pay that.
Yeah, I mean, you better clear this one up for us because obviously we went and looked, we heard this question and we went and looked in the Daily Telegraph and have a whole story about you living in a house that your wife owns and I think your father, and you pay...
I don't think he still owns.
I think well, the figures they had was you'd already claimed up to $100,000 or more than $100,000 in allowances relating to that. Did that actually go into the mortgage?
Well, Tony, I don't know. I pay rent. And you know, if it's...
Well, you pay rent to your wife.
Well, hang on. Well, is there a problem with that?
I'm asking you.
No, well, you're making the point. Is there a problem with that? Because I would be paying rent to some other person as well. I can pay rent to you.
Well,
I would pay hotel fees or room fees.
I suppose the question's raised here is whether people all over the country struggling to buy a home would find it acceptable that politicians get a taxpayer taxpayer-funded subsidy for buying a house.
Well, hang on. It's not a taxpayer-funded subsidy because we actually have to rent. So politicians that go to Canberra, they actually live in their electorates. And if they go to Canberra, they have to pay rent or they go to a hotel room, Tony. I don't know. Does the ABC do that when you travel?
They do, but the hotel's not owned by my wife.
Well,
let's go back to the questioner and see what he thinks. He raised it. We looked it up and we found some details. Go back to him.
Yeah, I just get the impression that, you know, it's a different rule in Canberra and it looks like the age of entitlement hasn't ended there.
well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but it's not. I mean, it applies for all politicians. It applies for public servants that travel away. Whoever goes away on business has to pay hotel room fees or rental accommodation, whatever the case. I'm sorry you feel that way. And it's been a common practice on all sides of politics because ultimately, most people want to have the same place over a number of years where they can leave their toothbrush at night. That's what you want. Instead of a hotel room or whatever the case, or renting different accommodation as people do, you know, you're away, I think I was away 185 days last year, and you try and have the same bed and you try and have the same place to leave a shirt.
Let's move on. Our next question is from Susanna Binstead.
Mr. Hockey, why do you think it's fair for young people like me to have more debt and deficits to pay off in tax on our wages when very rich old men don't even pay 10 cents tax on $100,000 of super income per year?
Well, there's two issues there. I think, are you getting at university fees? Is that what you were talking about? Your debt and...
Well, I think the main issue is about superannuation and the lack of tax on people with higher value super funds.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, in relation to superannuation, it's been a scheme that's been around since 1992. Paul Keating introduced compulsory superannuation scheme and it serves Australia well. So I always pay credit to Paul Keating for introducing the scheme. And life expectancy was 72 when he introduced the scheme. Today it's about 82. By the middle of this century, life expectancy will be close to 100 for someone born. So the question is, what sort of superannuation scheme is going to suit our needs into the future? Now, what happened was, under all the rules under the previous governments, all the way along, people were able to contribute to their superannuation as much as they wanted in certain cases, and they did. So if someone has $5 million or $8 million, whatever the case is, in their superannuation now, they've lawfully put that money into their superannuation. It's a lot of money, but they put it in lawfully. If we were to impose a new tax now, it would be a retrospective tax. It would be going and saying, well, sorry, you didn't do it lawfully. We're now going to tax all that money you put aside. And the question is, the fundamental question is whether that's right or not. Now, our view is, in the current environment, given that you've got very low returns on superannuation, it is not the time to introduce new taxes on superannuation. It is not the time to change the rules for superannuants. We want to give stability and certainty, and that is a stark contrast with our political opponents who want to impose a new tax on super.
OK, some of our viewers out there agree with your position. The next question is a video. It's from Steve Kelly in Carlton, Victoria.
Mr. Hockey, is it morally correct for Labor's superannuation policy to be based upon demonising senior and aged Australians using the terms like they abuse the system as tax havens, etc.? In fact, a succession of both Labor and Conservative governments have fostered and encouraged any and all Australians to participate in the superannuation system. Are you proud of the current coalition government's superannuation policy, including previous government's policy, including the no tax policy for the over 60s? Thank you, Joe.
That's a great question. Where did that come from?
And you know what? I think the questioner really wants to know whether this tax-free status will remain the case into future governments of the coalition.
Well,
because there's a bit of a question mark over whether that's only the case until the end of this term of government. You may change the rules afterwards, but you take it to an election.
Well, you know, the thing is, we are in a period of low returns on super, as I said, and the Governor of the Reserve Bank said this the other day. It's pretty obvious. You've got very low interest rates around the world. So I strongly feel, and the government strongly feels, that we shouldn't touch superannuation.
Yes, but I
this
mean,
moment. Now,
the
going
obvious
forward-
thing is that a never ever question.
Well, no,
or will you have a tax
I don't
review and maybe
subscribe. I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to never ever. I've seen that before
from the
in
Prime
politics.
Minister, because
from
your Prime Minister.
And what we said was, we are not changing it this term. We have no plans at all to change it in the future because, and I'll just make this point, the superannuation system now is far more complicated than it was 10 or 20 years ago, right? And it's become a honeypot that people would love, the governments would love to get into, right? But the thing is, it is so interwoven with the pension system now. It's interwoven with private health insurance and aged care as well. So if you're going to change superannuation, I think you've got to have a very holistic approach to it and look at all the moving parts, particularly the fact that we're all living longer. And one of the things that does cause me distress is where people have contributed to their superannuation over the years and they've saved it appropriately, but they're living a lot longer than they ever expected, which is terrific, but they're running out of money. So we've got to, at some point, and now is not the time, and it won't be for a while, but at some point we've got to look at the future of the entire retirement income system.
So just very briefly, because what you're saying essentially is this, and it's different to what Tony Abbott is saying.
No, it's no different.
It sounds like it is.
No, it isn't.
Because you seem to be saying we have no plans at this time, but we may have plans in the future.
No, well, I'd love to be in government still in 10 years' time and we could look at it or wherever the case is, but these are the sorts of lines that come back to haunt you, and the bottom line is we're not changing superannuation.
All right, the next question is from Dante Crisanti.
Thanks, Tony. Scott Morrison was reported in the Australian Financial Review of saying, and I quote, "The purpose of providing tax incentives is to encourage people to build up their super so they can draw down on it in retirement, not to maintain it as a capital pool to be passed on as inheritance." Talking about doing the right thing, a few years ago we downsized and moved into a modest duplex and increased our super. Our super now is returning 3.5% because of the low interest rate. As from the 1st of January 2017, we won't be eligible anymore for a pension, thanks to the doubling of the taper rate from $1.50 a fortnight to $3. And our income will drop below the $35,000 due for the pension. So this is my dilemma. Do I follow Mr. Morrison's advice and draw down our super in order to match the pension and therefore reduce the inheritance for my children? Or do I sell, buy a more luxurious home in a better suburb, reduce my super to $375,000, which is the upper limit for which I can get the full pension, and earn a disposable income of $48,165, and yet preserve intact the capital for the inheritance of my children? Which one should I do?
Right. Well, I'm not a financial advisor, but...
I knew you were going to say that. I wrote down, he's going to say, I'm not a financial advisor.
Well, because we license them. I don't want to get in trouble with ASIC.
Okay, but you know these changes have real-world consequences.
Of course they do.
That's the point.
And look, I understand that. The reason why there is a concessional status around superannuation is because it is meant to be there to fund your retirement. And one of the reasons why the family home is excluded, in part, is because it might be the inheritance, I understand, you want to give to your children. That's perfectly reasonable. But the concessional tax treatment for superannuation is not meant to be for the purposes of giving your children a bigger inheritance. It's actually meant to fund your retirement. And as Scott pointed out, you draw down 1.9% of your superannuation capital per annum in order to make up for that shortfall. If you have, in that case, $1.15 million of liquid assets in addition to your family home.
Yeah, but and he's saying he could actually buy a bigger house and still be eligible for the pension.
Well, here's a financial advice. You'd have to pay a lot of stamp duty on that transaction and real estate fees.
Okay, quickly,
so I can't see how
Dado wants to get in. I'll quickly go to...
I just don't understand the logic, where on one hand you say that you would not touch things in superannuation, and yet you make a decision which is going to affect everyone on a part pension. You are touching it or you're not touching it?
No, it's not everyone on a part pension.
Well,
it's the assets test.
Entitled to it
is, yeah, sure. And we're going back to the taper rate that applied under almost all of the Howard government. So that's what we're doing. And the thing was, when it was increased, the taper rate, when it was became more generous, the fact was they were running surpluses and had 40
so we've got
billion.
quite a few questions to get to. Sorry, Dante. The next question is a video. It's from Subita Vimalaraja in Newtown, New South Wales.
I started a petition against the taxing of sanitary products under the GST. It now has over 86,000 signees and over 11,000 submissions to your Better Tax Review. Mr. Hockey, do you think that sanitary products are an essential health good for half the population?
You could try saying I'm not a financial advisor.
I'm not a, yeah. Do I think that sanitary products are essential? I think so.
So should the GST be taken off?
Well,
That's the key
it
point.
probably should, yes. The answer's yes. What happened was when it was negotiated through the Senate by the Howard government, the Democrats had a list of things that they wanted excluded and they didn't have sanitary products on it. So it didn't happen.
So this is an oversight you might repair?
Well, I'm more than happy to if I need the agreement of the states. So good on you for getting that petition together.
I'll just make the point that she's Sabita actually did come into the audience after submitting that.
Where are you,
there she is, up there.
Well, good on you for getting the petition together. And I'll give you this undertaking. I'll raise it with the states at the next meeting of the Treasurers in July, I think.
Thank
Is
you
that okay?
so much.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I know, I understand that.
Okay. Not exactly keeping family tax benefit Part B, but it's a small step.
No, but it is. And you know what? It's actually. I was asked it in a pub the other day as well, in politics in the pub and a range of other places. So, look, I feel strongly about it. I'm fine about it.
Okay, our next question is from Amelia Discoros.
The budget papers include optimistic economic forecasts, with fiscal repair relying mostly on revenue growth. If our path back to surplus relies on mere hope that the economy and wages grow, we are not guaranteed that our deficit will be cleared. How will we then achieve surplus?
Well, Amelia, I don't think they are optimistic. I think they're about right. For example, we have forecast an iron ore price of around $48 a tonne. And, you know, currently it's about $56 a tonne. Also, I think what you're seeing is with very low interest rates and the world economy improving substantially, I think there's good global momentum building. And therefore, I think our assumptions, which are basically consensus forecasts, are about right. I think they're good. And they show we've got unemployment over the next 4 years coming down from its peak. We've got economic growth building up, but most importantly, we've got good export growth, and that's where we're going to get great job creation.
Okay, we're going to move things along so we can get through as many questions as we can. The next question is from Dinah van Dugteren.
Mr Hockey, recently I read in the Financial Review that, quote, the Abbott government's long-term surpluses have been bolstered by an inherited accounting change that includes for the first time earnings from the Future Fund in the budget's bottom line. Does this accounting change mean that future governments can delay reducing the deficit if they can rely on the Future Fund to close the gap between deficit and surplus?
No, you can't rely on the Future Fund. And when the Future Fund was set up and fully funded, it was always anticipated that in 2020 it'd start to be drawn down on to pay the public servants' superannuation, which is the purpose of the Future Fund. So it's all on track.
So, well, when does it start feeding into budget?
2020.
So not until 2020?
No, not until 2020.
So absolutely, because...
that's my understanding, it's 2020.
Labor is suggesting that this is actually one of the main measures you're drawing on to produce a surplus in, 4 or 5 years?
No.
Not true? Well, that
no,
is 20.
That's not
that is,
my
in fact, that is
understanding.
2020
No,
anyway.
it's not. I mean, look, you don't... Besides that, I mean, we're not... There's no games being played in trying to get this. I mean, I've laid it out on the table, the state of the books. I'd love to get back to surplus faster. I mean, I promise you, I went through what we went through last year as part of our economic plan to try and get back to the point. But the challenge is that we can't keep spending money unless we've got offsetting savings. So all the things that are going up to the Senate, such as the changes to paid parental leave, which pay for the extra money on childcare, or the changes to family tax benefit, pay for that. Everything has an offset, in which case we're trying to get government expenditure down and give people back more of their own money.
All right, there's a gentleman right up the back.
money.
The gentleman right up the back has had his hand up for quite some time. I'll quickly go to him.
Treasurer, we've talked a lot tonight about very specific measures in the budget, but we haven't really talked about an overarching message. I'm a university student actually studying in the United States, and I'm trying to pick a country where I'm going to spend the rest of my life. What, in your vision for the budget and for Australia, makes Australia a country that is attractive for people like me to move back to?
Well, it's a damn good question. And this is why I said at the end of my budget speech, I'm more optimistic about Australia than any time. Because the world is now divided into 3 time zones: the Asian time zone, European time zone, and the American time zone. And because services represent 70% of our economy, but just 17% of our exports, in our time zone, particularly into China and Japan and Korea and Indonesia and even India, we are able to export things like tourism services, financial services, health services, education services, which is going to lift the prosperity of our nation on a scale we've never seen before. Mining and resources represent about 9% of our economy, but 55% of our exports. So when I said, you know, we send 550 million tonnes of iron ore to China every year, which would build the Sydney Harbour Bridge from Sydney to Perth and back to Sydney every year, resources are just 10% of our economy, 9% of our economy. Yet, if we can lift the other 70% of the economy, which is the services-based industries, aged care, think of the demographic bubble in China, how we can export aged care, or IT services. And there are great Australian companies, particularly in IT. I mean, anyone who has children knows about, well, most people know about Mathletics, this great software business. I was praising it to the hill the other day, and then the guy sitting next to me said, yeah, I run it. He's got 4.5 million children around the world using this software program, and it's based 100 metres from my electorate office in the middle of Sydney.
Okay.
And I didn't know it. So that's why I think our opportunities are huge, because we're the most blessed country in the best place on earth.
Plus, there's a lot less competition in Australia for graduates than in the United States, you'd have to say. The next question is a video. It's from Shashenka Lakshmana Singer in Hawthorne, Victoria.
Hi, my name is Sashenka. I'm 22 years old and so proud to call Australia home. When I was young, I saw the effects of poverty and a lack of education in my community, but I also saw the hope and opportunity that came from those who could afford to, giving what they could. As an Australian taxpayer and voter, it saddens me to think that Australian aid is at the lowest we've ever given in my lifetime. My question is to Joe Hockey. Do you really think that these aid cuts reflect the fairness and generosity of Australians?
Shashenka, it's a good question, but in dollar terms, it's not the lowest it's ever been. That's not right. I mean, we're spending well over $4 billion a year. What we've had to cut our cloth everywhere. We've had to reduce expenditure everywhere.
If you could just explain for her exactly how much over the last 2 budgets you've cut the aid budget.
I mean, from memory, it'd be well in excess of $5 billion, right? But we've done it on the basis, and don't hold me to that figure, but we've done it on the basis that we couldn't keep sending money overseas to countries that in some cases were even then providing foreign aid themselves. So what we've done is we've reprioritised the aid budget to focus on our region, on our sphere of influence in the Asia Pacific. Secondly, we've looked at the economic performance of those countries, and in some cases they've got stronger economic growth than Australia. And we've said, look,